I'm Sherrod Seward. I'm the head attorney at Sherrod Sports Visas. I pretty much exclusively sports immigration law. Started in combat sports and kind of moved over to everything from squash to poker playing, professional video games, harness racing, something called midget racing, where they race in like little tiny go kart. I know that's what it's called. I don't want to call it that either, but they say that's just what it is. And right now we're doing quite a bit of work with student athletes, especially since the Olympics got delayed, has kind of caused some issues for a number of people that we never thought about. For example, there's some students that are staying in school when they thought they were getting ready to graduate, um, which means that they have to carry either like OPT or another status during the summertime, which could be a problem if if they don't have any OPT left, which is probably something we'll get into greater detail. Um, Sheena, question. I do have some like an introductory slide.
Yeah, I'll go
One
ahead and
second.
launch that now. All right, so we're going to be sharing the screen, and hopefully this works.
Okay. Yeah, so the one after that.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and record this
Okay.
for those of the students that can't join. And we will stop the recording at the end if you guys would like to ask some questions that aren't recorded. If you would not like to be recorded, please leave your camera off and your microphone off, and we'll ensure that you will not be recorded.
So we have a lot of coaches today.
Yeah, yeah. And we're live. Let's get started.
Okay. Gotta press continue. Okay. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. There's just a little introduction. That was the background of that is an immigration seminar I did in South Florida, where there's like a lot of the best combat sports facilities in in the world. There's like three of the best, right? But I get there, it's a packed room, but only two people speak English out of 70 people there. They all spoke Portuguese and Russian. But this is my background slide. So I'm from Columbus, Ohio, born on the campus of the Ohio State University. I went to Hampton University for undergrad, which is a private historically black college in Virginia, where I marched in the drumline because I was a music major, and that was the only credits I could get to get my recital credits. And then I went to law school in Cleveland, Ohio, at downtown Cleveland. I loved it, and that's where I found my first kind of profession in sports, which was I worked with a mixed martial arts promotion that went on to have several UFC champions. The gentleman that I'm with in that picture, his name is Stipe Miocic, and is the UFC heavyweight champion, what we like to call the baddest man on the planet. And typically, when I do these, I'll be able to see your faces and kind of see what you guys do. But just to let everybody else know who's in the room, we have a women's basketball coach. We have track and field. We have plenty of tennis. And I'll tell you what, it used to be a lot easier to get visas for tennis players. And there's been a couple of nuanced things that's made it much tougher to get P1s for tennis athletes. And that's something I'll bring up when I'm talking about the eligibility for P1. We have administration here, swimming. Oh, can I speak slow? Okay, I'll slow down a little bit. Is it still freezing or is it better? Okay, sounds good.
All right. Yeah, it's a lot better. Your video went out for a second, but we're back on track.
Okay. It's a little bit better. Okay, nice. One thing would be maybe helpful too is I notice I don't see what country everybody's from that's maybe interested in getting a visa. So if you can put a little note about what country you're from, I might be able to tell a little bit about the trends that are happening from adjudications in your country as well as the sport. All right. So we can go to the next slide. Jamaica. Yeah, I'm working on about 3 Jamaican track petitions right now as we speak. Ukraine. I have 2 boxing petitions from there. Okay. So I'm ready for the next one. I see the background. Let's see if we can get the next slide. All right. So the next slide is...
Sherrod, sorry to stop. We're having Sherrod, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm sorry to stop you, but I think we're having technical difficulties when we're sharing the
When we're sharing the slide? Can you hear me? Let me type.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. It caught. Yeah, I think if there's a delay for sharing the PowerPoint, so what I'll do is I'll email everybody, or I'll attach it here, in the chat box, so you guys should be able to see it in the chat box.
Okay. And then in the meantime, like if you have questions, just because I can't see your faces, if I see the comments, I can kind of make it interactive to make sure that I'm answering your questions as I'm going through it. But the next thing I was going to talk about is just go over the visas that are appropriate for athletes getting work authorization. And there's 2 main categories that fit. One is the P1 visa for internationally recognized athletes that are here to compete in a series of competitions that require the participation of international athletes, which is a mouthful, and I'll kind of break down what they mean by that. And then the other one is called the O1 visa category, which is for extraordinary ability foreign nationals that have risen to the top of their field of endeavor. And it's pretty subjective what that means by rising to the top. There's a couple of specific categories, things that they look for to get you into that occupation. Now, within those visa categories, there's 2 more things within each one that sometimes I can help athletes stay in the country by using. In the P visa category, there's something called a P1S, which is for the essential support staff of a P1 visa holder. So, for example, I'm doing a P1S for an athlete that wants to come here to try out in the NFL Combine. The problem is he doesn't have any background worthy of upholding a P1 petition. So how I'm doing this is that there is a shot putter in Nigeria that he trains with. I'm bringing that shot put athlete here to train for the Olympics, and then I'm bringing his friend, the ones that wants to do the NFL Combine, as his essential support staff. But the essential support staff can be used for a variety of reasons. Like, for example, sometimes I do it to get people's mothers or their brothers in if they happen to have a certain skill. Like, I did a yoga athlete. I did a figure skater whose mother was a yogi. And based off of that, I was able to get her a P1S visa for 3 years. Another example I did was an O1 application for a basketball prospect, and I was able to get his father in under O2 and then do the rest of his family through that O2. Because here's one thing you have to think about is even if you get a P1 and you want to bring family members in, you can only bring your spouse or your children. You can't bring in your siblings or your parents. So that's why a lot of times we try to bring in parents under the O2 if you have an O1, or we do it under the P1S if you have a P1, because you can't bring in your parents or your siblings as a derivative of a P1 visa. All right. So I'm going to the next slide now, which is going to get into more of the nitty-gritty and the benefits of these visa categories. So these are benefits that are applicable to both categories of the P1 and the O1. So for one, they last for multiple years. The P1 you can get for up to 5 years at a time. Right now, I'll be honest, it's very hard to get one for 5 years, so we're usually doing 3. And I'll explain why that it's hard to get it for 5 years. The O1 is available for 3 years, but both of these you can extend to a total of 10 years on either visa. And while you have one of these in your passport, you can travel all over the world as much as you want. So it's not like if you have a green card that you have to stay here half of the time. You could stay abroad and only come here to compete if you wanted to on these visas. There's no travel restrictions while you're under either the P1 or the O1 category. The other thing is, it's completely appropriate to get paid while you're on these visas. Now, there's
Rod, would you mind repeating that one more time? You were breaking up when you were explaining
the payment. Okay, can you hear me? Hey, let me see.
That's better.
Okay. Do you want me to try it from the iPhone? I have like the iPhone 11. You think I should try it from there, or just keep going here? Oh, let me type it. Should I try with the iPhone? I think you're on mute. Okay.
Better. You sound better right now.
I sound better right now? Okay.
You might have to start the O section again because that cut out.
Okay. So I was talking about the benefits of both the P and the O1, and I'll get into the eligibility requirements of both a little bit later in the presentation. But the part that I remember being cut off on is getting paid. So both of these are work authorization visas, which allow you to get paid for doing athletic services. But there's a difference. So with the P1, you can get paid for your athletic competitions and related activities, which means that you can get paid to race and you can get paid from sponsorships for your racing. But you cannot get paid for hosting seminars or coaching, which becomes a big issue. Now with the O1, there's a much more flexible work authorization. So you can get paid for competing, you can get paid for coaching, you can do commercials, you can write books, you can do anything that's remotely related to your industry or to your sport. So that's a big difference. And a lot of times, especially now, when there's strict enforcement, that if they see that you're doing seminars on a P1 visa, they might deny you the next time and bring you a screenshot of the advertising or the flyer for that event, which is something that I've seen happen in the not too recent past. So that's one thing to know. You can get paid on both visas, but the O1 visa is much more inclusive of work authorization than the P1. And that's important to remember. And I'm looking at my slide too to see if... Oh, here's the other thing. If you have aspirations of competing in a professional league, say, for example, if you're a soccer player or maybe even a tennis player that wants to get signed up with a club, if you already have your work authorization, a lot of times you're more attractive to those potential employers because they don't know that, one, they don't have to bear the expense of getting you a work authorization, and second, they don't have to bear the risk because right now it's the hardest time it's ever been to get O and P1 visas, and a lot of these teams do the visas themselves and they're not very good at it. So they only like to take their chances on people that they know will really get it. And if they come across somebody that they're on the borderline with, but they already have their work authorization, it looks good as far as them bringing them on to that opportunity. Oh, And then finally, the benefit of both visas is like, unlike the H-1B program or the H-2B, which are other common categories for people to pursue when they graduate from college, there is no labor certification process. So no employer or petitioner has to advertise the job before you're able to get these visas, which is important because right now, a lot of employers are hesitant to bring on college graduates that are foreign nationals just because the H-1B program is an absolute mess right now. And it's very hard to get approvals. All right, so I'm moving on to the next slide. Slide number 5. This is how we do it. And this is talking about the structure of what needs to be included for these visas. So in almost all circumstances, these visas are structured off of a contract for employment. And this contract could look different depending on what sport you're in and the structure of who the petitioner is, aka the sponsor of the visa. You cannot sponsor these visas yourself. Somebody has to actually sign the papers for you. And just common ways that this is, like, so if you're getting drafted into the NBA or some type of professional league, then this can be based off your contract with that professional league. If you are making a relationship with an agent that's going to help you through your career, you can base the petition off of your relationship with the agent. Now, there's other ways to do it too. Say, for example, if you don't have an agent and you're not in a sport that there's a professional league, or you're not in that professional league yet, then sometimes I've seen it to where you can get a sponsor that's like a brand. Like, you know, for example, in track, maybe Adidas is, you have a contract with them to wear their apparel while you're doing races, and then you can get somebody else to actually just serve as the petitioner, and your visa's based on that contract you have with Nike or some other employer. This could even happen if you have a business overseas. For example, we had a barrel horse racer. It's a rodeo sport where you ride a horse around 3 barrels as fast as you can. And she happened to own a saddle company where she makes saddles for these racing. And so we did a contract between just one of her friends saying that they're serving as the U.S. agent of a foreign employer, which was the business that she owned, to do the petition. So she's like, I need to race because I'm marketing my business in Australia. And we got that through, no problem. Now, these contracts don't necessarily need to include everything that's going to be going on. They just need to know specific things. They need to know wages, so how much you plan to earn or how you will earn it. So, for example, you might not know if you're going to make $6,000 per month, but you do know that you'll be making 70% of your winnings from your races and 50% of your sponsorship money. And that's appropriate to do. To say, like, I don't know exactly how much I'm going to be making, but I estimate it to be this, and it's going to be a percentage of my activities that I'm doing. The other thing they want to know is your hours of work. So usually for an athlete, we'll say they'll be competing this many times per month and training for this many hours per week. I'm just looking to see if I have any questions. Okay. And they'll also want to know working conditions and fringe benefits. This means, are you getting any lodging? Are you getting a stipend for your training? Are you getting any health benefits? Things of that nature that comes with the contract. Now, the other parts of it, if it's a P visa petition, is that we'll need an itinerary of your competitions. Usually we do this for 12 months. And it's okay if you don't know every competition that you're going to be in. But the main thing we want to highlight is the ones that you know for sure there'll be other international athletes competing in, or the ones where you have to have a certain amount of prestige to even get an invitation. The other thing that's helpful is getting letters from experts in a consultation letter. So experts can be other high-level athletes, former high-level athletes, your coaches, and media people in the sport. So one thing I like to tell student athletes is that if you know that you might want to pursue the O or the P visa in your senior year and even late in your junior year, do as much press as you can. So when you see a microphone, go talk to them, get friendly, so that what happens is when we Google your name, we can see that you've been featured in local newspapers and maybe even call back home and see if you can get interviews with the papers in your home country. So that way we can say, well, hey, look, they've been featured in news articles here in the United States and also at their home country, which we can say they're well recognized in more than one country, which is one of the eligibility criteria for the P1 visa. And then the other part is where we actually make you eligible. So in both the P1 and the O1 categories, they have several specific things that they're looking for. In the P1, there's about 7 things they're looking for. Of that, you got to prove 2. In the O1 visa category, there's 8 things they're looking for. And you either got to have an Olympic gold medal, and sometimes they want more. Believe it or not, I've seen petitions where I've said somebody has won a bronze medal, and they say, we don't think that's a major award enough to just stand on its own to to get an O1 visa, which is where we are now. And we're probably taking those people to court. So if you don't have a major award that's like the equivalent to a world championship, an Olympic medal, or just something like that, or a big regional international championship, then you got to prove 3 of the other categories, which we'll go into. I'm ready for the next one. So this is the next slide is qualifying for P and O visas, and this is where I'm talking about the specific details that you need to know about and to meet to get either category. All right. So remember, and just because you meet these categories, still remember that you still have to have a contract that makes sense and a list of things to do, which in the P visa is much harder than the O visa, which I'll explain. So in the P visas, as you can see, I have 7 categories listed. And of these, you need to have 2. You have to have at least 2 to be eligible for the P1 visa. Now, as being an NCAA athlete, it's great because you've already have one. One of the eligibility criteria is that you have participation in intercollegiate competition. So if you're on a team with the school and you played the season prior, more likely than not, you have satisfied this eligibility requirement and you only have to meet one other one to be eligible for the P1 visa. So let's look at the other criteria. One is competition with the national team. So a lot of athletes come here to go to school, play for the school, and then they compete for their international team during the time they're not at school. And this is great because this is a good basic bare bones of a good petition because you've already met 2 criteria. Now, USCIS has found some way to be, I'm put as more aggressive about what qualifies as competing for your national team. So it's not just like we can say like, hey, you did it and that's it. We're probably putting 30 or 40 pages of evidence into, and a supporting letter from that organization to show and have no problems at all that you were on that national team, that you participated in a significant way, and that led you to be recognized in more than one country, right? Because sometimes they'll let you through with just getting a letter from your home country sports organization, but we do so many of them that we see some crazy things. So we like to leave no stone unturned and submit all the evidence we can. But if you compete for your national team and you're on the school team, it's great. You're almost pre-eligible for the P1A visa if the evidence is properly submitted. Now, if you haven't competed for your international team, it's not a problem. There's still other categories that you can meet. One is a statement from the governing body. So, for example, if you're in track and field and we provide a letter from USA Track and Field that says they have no objection to you getting a visa, and then they look at your accomplishments and they say these accomplishments are significant and give specific reasons why, then that's another category that can be satisfied there. A statement from the governing body of the sport. Now, this is tricky, and it's not something that you want to necessarily rely on for a couple of reasons. For one, I know for a fact that the lady that's over USA Track and Field and issues the letters, she must get a lot of them because it takes a long time to get those letters back. I'm talking 2 to 3 months. So if you need to get your petition out and you're relying on having a letter from the governing body of the sport, and it's track and field or another sport where it's just hard to get the letter, you might be out of luck if you can't get it back on time. So that's one thing to think about. And then also another problem is they're getting more strict with what they want including in that letter. So say if they give you a letter and they say you're great and they only list your opportunities, your awards without saying why they're important, USCIS has been rejecting those letters as not good enough to satisfy that criteria. And it's something that me and other attorneys in the industry that do sports-related immigration are considering federal litigation just to combat that type of aggression on the consultation letters. And sometimes the consultation letter does not have to come from an organization that's in the United States. For example, in boxing, there are several sanctioning bodies that are considered very reputable, and 3 of them are in Mexico. So we're able to get those consultation letters from the Mexican body, the Mexican-based organization that regulates all over the world, and it's no problem for getting the visas through. Next, you can do it with opinions from media and other experts. This is also for the same reason as the consultation letter. It's nice. I always include these in the petition if it's available, but I never fully rely on it as an absolute slam dunk because they can always say that your experts aren't experts, and then they could always say that what the experts said wasn't specific enough to show that you are internationally recognized in more than one country. Believe it or not. The next one I like a lot is international rankings in the sport. And this is great if you're in a sport where they keep one list of the international rankings, and you don't need to be the highest. You just need to be better than most on these. And examples of sports where this is very helpful is boxing. How can coaches help? Okay. Well, coaches can help. Well, let me finish it. Well, let me finish this one about the rankings. So the rankings are good in sports like track because there's one system that shows everybody from around the world. Swimming is pretty good too. Boxing is another one, but there's other sports where it might not be as prevalent, or the ranking systems just aren't from as reputable organizations. Say, for example, mixed martial arts fighters, there's no world ranking body for mixed martial arts. So, you might be getting rankings from a little news outlet in Brazil or something that doesn't carry much weight. Or it might be something that's user generated by people like around the world just going around and voting. But we don't know what these people's accolades are to be voters in the first place. So how can coaches help students? One is making sure they're thinking about the process. So it's very tough nowadays to get a petition together in 2 weeks. So while they're in their final season of competition, if they're going and having interviews and stuff like that, that's good. So if you can encourage them, keep it on their mind like, hey, this is your last year. It's time for you to do well, of course, but also let other people know you're doing well by speaking with the media. The other thing is coaches can provide expert letters of support because they know them very well, and they can do a very good job of explaining why their accomplishments are significant, right? Because, they might have won a regional championship, but they might not know what it took to be eligible for that championship, what the level of the competition they faced in that championship was. They might not know other people that have won the same award that's went on to do amazing things. So expert letters from coaches are very helpful for explaining the nuances of what the athlete did and what that means in the grand scope as a sport as a whole. And also, other coaches know former athletes that might have done very well that they can introduce to maybe write support letters and things of that nature too. So the main thing is like keeping it on the athlete's mind to do well and make sure other people know by speaking to the media to get a track record. And the other thing to do is to write a support letter and also introduce them to other people that can write support letters on their behalf. Okay, now I'm going back to the P visa eligibility requirements. The next one is significant honors and awards, what I kind of just spoke about with the coaches. So you have to have the awards, and then it's important to explain why they're significant. And then, so the last one is one that no college student should have. And if you do, you might have been ineligible this whole time. It's prior experience with a major league sports team. So I hope that you haven't played for the NBA and then played in college, because that's bad. But that's any professional. So it's the major sports here. So if you played professionally overseas, that doesn't count for this purpose. Now I don't know what that does for your eligibility with NCAA, but that wouldn't that doesn't count towards its eligibility requirement. By major league sports, they mean things like the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, things of that nature. Okay, I was looking to see if there's any is breaking up. Okay, let me get a smiley face, see if you can hear me again. I'll give you one. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I think it's better now.
Okay.
I got a smile.
All right. So the P1 visa is considered easier to obtain than the O1 because a lot of these categories are pretty objective, meaning you either have it or you don't. And it's easier to explain why you have it than some of these other eligibility requirements of the O1. So the P1 is easier to get because the criteria for eligibility are more objective. You either have it or you don't. Now, when we go to the O1 visa, it becomes much more subjective, which means it's not as easy as I have this or I don't. There's a lot of room for interpretation. So let's go through it. So remember, you can always get an O1 visa if you won an Olympic medal, usually, we would hope. Or if you won a world championship. I'm not sure if an NCAA championship counts, but I would like to see. So if you get one, I'll do your petition for free. If you let me see if I could just put you on the NCAA championship and see if that gets it. You can count me on that. And just because I'm happy for you as well. All right, but if you haven't won the gold medal, no problem. We can prove 3 of these other categories. One is I think we got a typo here. So one is sustain. It's supposed to be for. I know why I changed it. I changed it because there's There's a couple categories with the O1 that are only appropriated for professionals. So if you look at 7, the last one, remuneration, that means that you've been paid more than other people in your field, and it's usually like you want to be paid at the top 20%. But of course, if you're an amateur, it's impossible to prove this because you haven't been paid yet. Now, if you have a contract on the table that's for a lot of money, it's something that we can maybe argue, but in general, it's not a good look to argue for that category if you're an amateur. Another one that doesn't necessarily fit, well, it might. So one is judging the work of others. So for an athlete, sometimes we're able to get this if you are an assistant coach or a grad assistant and you've been selected to coach the team or teach a class or something like that. that's something that can be very helpful for this category. But like I said, the O1 is very subjective because, judging the work of others, what does that actually mean? It turns out that they don't know either. And so that's why we just have to try as best we can with a lot of these O1s. But I have seen it be effective if you have coaching experience, referee experience, or teaching experience in your sport. And sometimes even training experience with other athletes. If they say like, hey, I picked this person specifically to train with me because of these certain attributes that they have, and they've already been at this level. And I don't train with anybody else except for if they've met this level. Another one that I forgot to mention on here is membership in a prestigious group. So this can be if you've been selected to the all-conference team, or you've been selected as an All-American. That is the type of thing that we can argue for two categories. We can use that as significant awards, and we can also use that for membership in a prestigious organization. All right. And the other one we can use is always, so if you didn't win the gold medal, but you have other significant awards, we can always include those as well as one of the eligibility criteria. And then O1s, it's very important to have expert letters, because the expert letters are what we use to confirm all of the arguments that we made, right? Because in an O1 petition, because everything's so subjective, we're saying a lot of things that there might not be evidence just in some type of rule book about. We need to bring in experts to tie up all those loose ends to our arguments so they look at them as credible. And unlike the P1, we have to prove 3 of the O1 visa criteria. And one thing I'll do is I'll talk about the difference and like why you might need a P or why you might need an O. So the P1 visa is easier to get because it's easier to be eligible. But that's only half the battle. The second part is you got to know that you can only get paid to compete or related activities to getting paid, which is like getting sponsorships. You cannot coach and do seminars on a P1 visa. Okay. The other issue with the P1 visa is that you have to be scheduled or plan to be competing in events that require the participation of international athletes. So if you are graduating and you want a P1, but you know that you're not going to be competing in anything but like little club things here and there, the P1's not going to work for you. It has to be world level like competition, not all of them, but some of them. So for example, in track, we know that you're going to be doing a lot of competitions that all you have to do is sign up to be eligible. But you might have 3 or 4 on your schedule per year that you might not be signed up for, but you plan to go, that have certain requirements, certain amount of wins, certain amount of recognition to get an invitation that will put into your petition to meet this requirement. Because this is one thing that they're using to deny visas, P1 visas. Even if somebody's very eligible, if they don't think that your itinerary is specific or important enough, they are denying visas for this purpose. And the other thing to know is you can't per se say that I'm going to be training too. We don't call training when we're doing P1 visa competitions. What we say is that you'll be doing competitions and exhibitions. Even for, I do a lot of visas in combat sports, I don't call their practice. I call it world-class exhibitions. There just happens to be no sanctioning body there or no fans. Because if you call it training, they'll say like, well, you're not coming to the United States solely to compete for your on your P1. So we leave that part out. It is not to say that you're not allowed to train. You are allowed to train, but your training is not appropriate to be part of your P1 petition, if that makes sense. But if you are here training and you're not getting paid and you're not coaching and doing seminars, you're fine. It's just not something that we can include readily in your P1 application because that's not what P1s are for. Now, on the O1, they are harder to get because of the eligibility requirements are more subjective, but you do not have to have a series of international level events to compete to get it. So for example, if you know that you're not going to be trying to go for the Olympics and you kind of just want to compete here and there, but you would like to coach or you want to write books or maybe you want to start like camps or things of that nature, then, or if you only want to come here to train for competitions in other countries. For example, if you're on your Olympic team, but you don't have any competitions here, then you might want to have an O1 just so you can train here and go compete in other countries. So the O1 is appropriate if you know that you're not going to be competing in international level competition. Much more flexible and a lot more options. But just know that it's harder to get, and there's some categories that you won't be eligible for, which is remuneration, which means that you've been paid more than other people in your industry, and probably employment in essential capacity because you haven't been employed yet, hopefully, because you're an NCAA amateur athlete, right? All right, so I lost it. So I'm ready for the next slide, which is slide 7. Oh, so one thing I need to talk about again is a sponsor. You cannot sponsor yourself for a P1 or an O1 visa. There has to be a U.S. company or a U.S. individual to serve as the petitioner. On an O1 visa, the petitioner can it can be anybody. They just need to say that I'm serving as sponsor for this petition, which means that they assert that everything in the petition is true to the best of their knowledge. They agree to service a process, which means if you get sued, they got to see you at their address. Not that they're liable. And then 3, they are technically on the hook for the price of your flight back if your visa is terminated early. Now, it's something that we don't see enforced a lot, but it's there in the regulations. And that's for the O1. It could be pretty much anybody that can actually serve as the petitioner. Now, on a P1, technically anybody can serve as the petitioner, but you got to be careful because oftentimes they're more strict on whether the petitioner needs an international athlete. So that way, in P1s, we usually advocate for a sports league or an agent to be the petitioner, just because it helps make a stronger argument that the athlete is needed for international competitions. One thing that we do on occasion is we have an affiliated sports agency that has a sports license to serve as petitioner in certain circumstances. And what we do is if somebody has like a friend or a brand that's overseas, we serve as what's called the U.S. agent of a foreign employer, which means that they are doing the day-to-day activities of managing, and we're just serving as the petitioner, which means that we assert that what's in the petition is true to the best of our knowledge, agree to get service of process if there is a liability issue, and 3, we make an agreement with whoever your day-to-day person is to share the cost of a flight back home if something should happen before the visa validity date ends. And I think, so the next one, and I'm going to breeze over this, just because right now in your career it's not going to be something that's on the table. But I'll go over the green card options for you. there's three options that are technically available to athletes, but only one of them is likely. So I'll talk about the two that are unlikely, which is the EB3 and the EB2. And EB stands for employment-based visa. And the reason why these visas are not common with athletes is because they require a labor certification, which means you have to advertise the job with the Department of Labor. And usually when you advertise a sports job, you get a lot of applications. So it's just hard to really convince people that you can't find Americans to do a job that's involving sports. It just doesn't happen very often. Now, there is an exception. So if you are playing in a major sports league, which is usually the NFL, MLB, and NBA, WNBA, then they have a special process called special handling, where they can get a labor certification in 2 weeks, and that's a whole different process. So if you do make it to the WNBA or something like that, or to a professional sports league, then maybe the EB2 or the EB3 process is a realistic thing to look at, just because though the teams can use special handling to pretty much get by the labor certification. It doesn't apply to them. They can do some special things they lobby for. All right, so that leaves us with the EB1A. And this is otherwise known as the Einstein visa, which means it's like, it says in the regulations, like if you've won a Grammy or something like that, then this is the type of visa that's for you. But you don't need to have actually won a Grammy or a world championship to get one. It's very similar to the O1, very, very similar. It's just that they look at it a little bit more thoroughly. The reason why this is the best way to go is because you don't need a sponsor. This is a self-sponsored green card. So you don't need anybody to sign any papers for you. You can do this one on your own. And the eligibility requirements are similar to the one for O1. It's just that it's very unlikely that you can get one straight coming out of college, because you'll need to prove a lot of your commercial success to get the EB1A. And as far as EB1A, it takes a while. Like right now, it's probably taking about a year and a half to get these EB1As, because for one, they just take a long time and there's no premium processing, and there's two parts to it. One is the form I-140, where you go and get yourself approved as being an extraordinary ability foreign national. Then the second part is adjustment of status, is where you get your permanent residence. A couple months ago, there were visas available for adjusting status, so you can file your I-140 and your I-485 at the same time. But now you have to wait, because they're still adjudicating petitions from, I would say, last June. So you have to wait for them to catch up to having visas available until you can adjust status, even if you're approved for the EB1A. So one thing that we're doing is we're applying for EB1A and O1s at the same time, because if you want to travel back and forth while you're waiting for your green card, you have to have a visa now. You still have to have a non-immigrant visa to remain in the country and travel back and forth, even while you're on EB1A, just because there's no visas available to adjust status. So usually you have to apply for the I-140, wait like 8 months, and then apply to adjust status. And so that's why this process is taking like a year and a half or more now to get done. And the last slide, that concludes kind of what I had on the slides for going through the presentation part. And now we have time for the interactive. Who has questions? And if you type them, I can see them. Scroll down and see Sheena's. Oh. Put everyone. Yes, so Sheena, I'm just waiting for questions. Okay. I see one. I'm 9 times all age group national championship, World University Games. Okay. Okay. So someone's saying that they have awards in their sport, never been paid, except for the military, 7-time champion conference, has a record in their sport. Okay, so they're asking how likely it is that they can get an O1 with winning as a national championship in their country, competing with their country at a World University Games, being part of their military sports club, then being a conference champion, and setting a record. All right, so let's just break this down. So if you have good awards, that's one category. Now, if you've been an All-American, that is a good argument for membership in a prestigious organization. Now, if you've been picked by your federation, or like maybe, now here's where we get subjective. So you got 2 categories there, right? And so now this is where we have to get creative, because you still have to have one more eligibility status to get O1. So let's look at what they are. We've looked at membership in prestigious organization and significant national awards. Now we got to look and see if you can't do remuneration, because you probably haven't been paid by anyone enough to get that. We can look to see if you've been featured in publications. So if there's a lot of media about you out there winning these things, both internationally and here, that's a good argument to fulfill 3 of those eligibility criteria. And if you can get experts to kind of prove that as well. And then it says you're a meet record holder in the breaststroke. So the breaststroke would probably go into significant awards. And I'm trying to just go through my head. Now, here's another one, but it's hard to do. So say another part of the O1 is if you have original contributions. So say if you have developed a certain type of technique that nobody else is doing, that counts too. The only problem is it's just so hard to prove, right? So if you come up with a breathing technique and you're a swimmer, that can work, but it's just how do we prove that you came up with it? And what we would do is if you had media reports that say like, hey, she's winning because of her unique twitch in her hips or her breathing, and then we get expert letters to kind of confirm that too, that can meet that criteria. So I would say, no. Oh, sorry, he's a guy. I didn't say I didn't even look at the name. I would say it's not that kid. That's not the case, I guess. No, I'd say it's okay. It's just like I'd have to look more into how much media coverage there is on you, because you already have 2 categories. You just need one more. But we just have to really go and see and dive into how good we can make those arguments. Because if you have a lot of press on you, then we can really press that. And then you have 3 good arguments right there. So I wouldn't give up on it. And I'll tell you what, one thing that we do in our office for people that pursue O1s is that we say we'll pursue the O1, but also we'll do the P1 like at a really reduced rate if you don't get it. And that's because, sometimes you can put forth a really good application, but it just doesn't fit right. And a lot of times in O1, you don't know until you try. So we'll send a good petition to them. They'll come back with their request for evidence, and then we sit down with you and say like, okay, this looks like something we can push over the hump or something that we can't. And if we can't, what we do is we repackage that application to a P1 and add the list of events, and then repeal the O1 if it doesn't look like it's getting close. So I say if you have 2 categories for sure and a 3 possible, if you have the means to do it, you should go for the O1 and then use the P1 as a backup. And then also remember, you can, if you know other people that are on P1s or O1s, you always have the backstop of maybe being essential support staff to them. So you can at least stay in the country while you bolster your eligibility requirements. You know, maybe do more press, maybe do some more amateur competitions, things of that nature. You know, so if you're close to the O1, we, as a coach, right. So as a coach, really your only option is to get the O1 visa in most cases, because you can't get a P1 as a coach and you can't do coaching activities as a P1. The only time that you can have a P1 visa as a coach is if you're in a major sports league. That's the only time they approve it. So if you're a coach, your only options are to get an O1 visa or to get an O2 or a P1S as essential support staff. So say, for example, if you want to go coach for a club team or something like that, or some type of training facility, if they have one person in that organization that's on P1 or O1, then you can apply for O2 or P1S. Track and field. Okay, track and field. Yeah, for track and field coaches, then you're definitely probably looking at the O1, unless the club team that you're going to or whatever organization or athlete you're supporting has a P1 or an O1. You know, for example, there's a lot of Jamaican people around in the United States with P1s in track. So if you're affiliated with one of them and coaching one of them, then you can do the P1S if you can't get your own O1 visa petition. But yes, O1 visas are not only appropriate for coaches, they are often the only option for coaches. I see that the swimmer is talking about their special techniques. It won't apply in my case. Okay. I guess they're doing everything by the book. No new books. But if you have a book or a training manual, that is good. So even if you did a scholarly, like if you're in, if you do school papers and they happen to get picked up in your journals and stuff like that, that can work towards scholarly articles. That is one part of the O1 eligibility. If you have scholarly articles and trade publications, or which can include school journals. So if you do write, don't forget about that. Let me know. You guys have much more questions. I must have did a good job. One thing I'll bring up is okay, don't have yet, but a good option. Okay.
Sherrod, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. That way the students can answer the questions over the microphone if they'd like.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, so you're not being recorded right now. If you guys would like to ask questions.